By the exit, under the flicker of a forgotten chandelier. My name is Alina Graves, and they sat me by the exit. Not a metaphorical one. A literal exit, next to the emergency door, where the uplighting cast a jittery flicker, and the air smelled faintly of old carpet and overused perfume. Table 29. No centerpiece. No name card. Just a stack of extra linen napkins and a half-wilted hydrangea in a glass vase that had clearly been recycled from the buffet. It was my sister's wedding. The place was breathtaking, white tents glowing against the vineyard hills, chandeliers suspended from satin-lined beams, menus printed in cursive gold on heavy cream cardstock. Every detail screamed curated perfection. Except me. I arrived early, as I tend to do. I handed over the gift, wrapped in soft navy linen, no bow, and offered a polite smile to the check-in girl who, after squinting at her list, asked, "Graves with an C or nos?" She couldn't find my name. I spelled it. Then again. She flagged someone in a headset who whispered into a mic and finally waved me in like I was a late vendor, not a guest. No one greeted me. No one turned. Not even Marielle, my sister, who, hours later, would float down the aisle in silk organza and diamond hairpins like the main character she was always destined to be. I was dressed carefully, not extravagantly. A graphite sheath dress that hit just below the knee, minimal jewelry, low heels. Classic, understated, invisible apparently. As the ushers guided the guests, I waited for my name to be called. It was, someone pointed. "You can sit over there." They didn't even say the table number. Just over there, so I sat, near the catering staff's water station. 2 tables behind a hedge wall that blocked the band. I didn't flinch, not outwardly. This wasn't my first family event. I knew how the hierarchy worked. Immediate family in front, friends of the bride just behind, out-of-town guests and distant cousins somewhere near the middle. Then came the plus ones, the children of plus ones, the old piano teacher, the former neighbor, the obscure aunt twice removed. And then came me, Marielle's only sister. No introduction, no toast, no seat beside anyone who recognized me. I poured myself water. No waiter came. The glasses at my table were misaligned, as if even the layout crew hadn't expected anyone to sit here. But I wasn't surprised. There's a certain rhythm to being overlooked. It starts early. A missed birthday, a forgotten parent-teacher night, a family photo where your name is spelled wrong in the caption. It builds, quietly, effortlessly, until you begin to question whether you're meant to be seen at all. As I watched guests clink glasses and lean in with the easy laughter of shared history, I felt it again. That soft pressure in the chest that doesn't scream or sob, just settles. You'd think I'd be used to it, but tonight felt different. Not because I expected anything more, but because this time I came prepared not to be seen, but to watch. And sometimes, watching is where the real power begins. They didn't mean to erase me. They just forgot to leave space where I could exist. There wasn't a single moment when I became the quiet one. It didn't start with some cruel event. No outburst. No betrayal. Just a slow narrowing of space, the way walls inch inward without you noticing, until one day you can't stretch your arms without hitting something invisible. Marielle came into the world 3 years after me, loud and colicky and impossible to ignore. She had curls that bounced and eyes that caught light. People would lean down and say, "She's going to be something one day," and then glance at me, standing beside her, and smile politely, not cruelly, just briefly. When our father was alive, there was balance. He was the one who noticed, who saved my stick figure drawings, who made me pancakes shaped like the planets and told me I had Mars fire behind my quiet. He died in a car accident when I was 11. I remember the casserole dishes, the smell of lilies, the murmurs in the hallway, but mostly I remember silence. My mother didn't fall apart, not exactly. She reorganized. She poured herself into survival, routine, efficiency, image, and Marielle, already dramatic by nature, filled every room with need. She wailed at night, refused to go to school, clung to our mother's waist with the desperation of someone who understood that grief creates gaps, and that gaps get filled by whoever makes the most noise. I did the opposite. I got up quietly, packed my own lunches, set the table, finished homework without being asked, disappeared with such grace they began to assume I preferred it that way, and maybe I did. Maybe silence felt safe, predictable. Maybe it was my way of honoring the man who used to see me when no one else did. But the truth is, I stopped trying to be noticed long before I stopped wanting it. As we grew up, the gap widened. Marielle was dresses and dances, scraped knees and stage lights. I was spreadsheets before I knew what spreadsheets were. A straight-A student with 0 trophies. I won a regional essay contest at 15, no one read it. At 16, I told my mother I wanted to study finance. She blinked and said, "Isn't that a bit cold?" Marielle announced she wanted to study fashion design. They threw a themed dinner, but I kept going. Scholarship, Ivy League. First internship by 19. I sent postcards. They sent emojis. They weren't malicious. They were just full of themselves, their expectations, the shiny parts of the family story they liked to tell at brunch. There wasn't room for the daughter who stayed late at data labs or who negotiated a merger in her final semester. They called me Elena the Logical. Elena the Good One. Elena, oh, she's probably busy. And so I became busy. I didn't announce promotions. I didn't invite them to events. When Graves' Equity Circle launched, I didn't even send the press release. It wasn't resentment. It was resignation. Like realizing a letter you wrote was never going to be read, so you stop mailing them. Still, I showed up. Weddings, baby showers, holiday dinners where I brought wine they never opened and left with Tupperware that wasn't mine. They would say things like, "Elena's so mysterious. Elena's always working. Elena's doing something in finance, I think." And I'd smile, the kind of smile that doesn't ask for follow-up. Because after a while, not being seen becomes less painful than being seen incompletely. So when the wedding invitation arrived, delivered to an old address, misspelled name, no +1, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Not because I expected anything. Not because I wanted redemption. But because I've learned something valuable in the shadows. Sometimes the most honest place to observe a family is from the outside edge of the celebration. And I was ready to watch. Some names are spoken in boardrooms long before they're spoken in living rooms. In the public registry, Graves' Equity Circle appears as a mid-sized private firm headquartered in Manhattan, with a modest footprint and a clean compliance history. What it doesn't say is that we've quietly backed over 37 long-term infrastructure and housing developments across 6 cities. That we work only with partners who agree to our triple bottom line clause: people, planet, permanence, and that I own it entirely. I founded the company at 29, quietly, deliberately, no ribbon cutting, no press tour, just a single press statement and an ethics charter published online. Our first investment was a small, overlooked property in Newark, low ROI, high impact. A project most firms would toss for lack of flash. We turned it into a sustainable housing model that's since been cited in 2 policy reform bills. The team I built didn't come from Ivy League mixers or yacht clubs. They were community developers, nonprofit analysts, refugee entrepreneurs, people who had been left out of the system and knew how to fix it from the inside. And through it all, I stayed in the background, not because I was afraid, but because silence gave me clarity. No pressure to impress. No need to justify choices to people who wouldn't understand them anyway. When my name did surface, whispers in city planning meetings, nods in closed-door energy panels, it was never accompanied by a photo. Some assumed Graves was a man. Others thought we were a firm inherited from some old money patriarch. No one guessed it was a woman who once sat at the kitchen door of her own family's legacy. And that suited me fine. I never cared to be famous. I wanted to be effective. Let Marielle have the spotlight. I'd take the schematics. Let them call me mysterious. I'd rather be decisive. Let them ask what I did for a living. I'd rather show them what I built, not with billboards, but with impact so tangible it could house hundreds. When the wedding invitation arrived, part of me wondered if I should politely decline. I knew what would happen. the awkward seating, the missed name card, the way Gerald Prescott, Marielle's new father-in-law and a man whose real estate empire was built on concrete and loopholes, would glance past me like I was part of the staging crew. But I also knew something else. 2 months earlier, Daniel, Marielle's fiancé, had reached out to me, not through family, not by accident. He'd done his own digging and found our office through a sustainability award we won for the Shoreline Buildback project. He asked to meet, not because he knew who I was, but because he liked our work. He'd been trying to push for more ethical construction standards in his father's firm, and he was hitting walls. We spoke over coffee for nearly 3 hours. He asked real questions, listened, didn't blink when I laid out our compliance demands, and at the end he said, "I didn't realize you were her sister." I smiled, neither does she. It was Daniel. I offered the ring. A simple platinum band with no diamonds, no brand engraving, just a micro-etched folded leaf insignia on the inner rim. One of only 14 ever made by our team. Reserved only for those who helped fund our seed phase, who believed in impact over image. He didn't ask what it meant, he just said thank you. That's when I knew this wasn't about Marielle, not really. This was about honoring a connection built on values, not lineage. A small act of clarity in a room full of performance. Let Gerald speak about market share. Let the planners discuss expansion zones. I'd speak with legacy. The kind you wear without needing to explain it, so I attended the wedding. Not to impress, not to reveal, but to watch the moment the world tilted ever so slightly toward the truth. It didn't take a speech, just a symbol. Small, precise, undeniable. The ceremony had already passed. Vows were exchanged under an arbor of white roses. The photographer had captured the kiss from 5 angles. Marielle had beamed like royalty, her gown shimmering as if stitched from golden thread and spotlight. No one noticed that I sat alone during the reception toast, or that I poured my own water, or that the menu at table 29 had someone else's name typed in my place. But I noticed, and I waited, because I knew what was coming. Leia No, Marielle Now, with her freshly printed monogram, had insisted on a non-traditional gesture, a second ring presentation during the reception. Just for us, she told the crowd. A private vow spoken publicly, a symbol of their own personal bond. She clasped Daniel's hand with both of hers. The guests leaned forward, the room hush-soft with anticipation. She slid the ring onto his finger, slow and smiling. A platinum band, polished to subtle matte, with no glimmer, only purpose. The room clapped politely. The band struck up a soft jazz interlude. Someone toasted. And then Gerald Prescott stopped. He hadn't looked closely until then. Hadn't needed to. But as Daniel raised his hand briefly to adjust his cufflink, the light hit the inside of the ring, just right. Gerald squinted. Froze. Then leaned forward with the instinct of a man used to contracts and clauses, of noticing the details no one else does. His voice was low but sharp. Where did he get that ring? Daniel blinked, confused. Marielle followed his gaze, frowning. It's from Alina, Daniel said casually. A wedding gift. Gerald's head snapped up. Alina. He turned slowly to face my corner, and for the first time that night our eyes met. But this time his didn't slide past me. He stared, not at my dress, not at the corner table, but at me. You gave him that. I didn't smile. Didn't blink, only nodded. I did. Where did you get it? I designed it, I said quietly. It's one of ours, Graves' Equity Circle. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. The way air holds still before a storm. The way a room realizes it's misjudged something or someone profoundly. He didn't speak again for a full 8 seconds. And in that pause, I saw the entire equation unfolding behind his eyes. The ring, the insignia, the name, Graves, the firm he'd tried to outbid twice. The project he dismissed as idealistic nonsense. The regulatory panel his team kept stumbling over in recent zoning reviews. He'd assumed Graves was a surname on a door. He never thought it might be me. He exhaled, not in relief, in recalculation. Everything he knew about this wedding, this family, just shifted, And I sipped my water, calm, still, because power doesn't need to announce itself. Sometimes it just sits patiently until someone else notices what it's always known. Power doesn't knock. It doesn't shout. It simply changes the direction people look. Gerald didn't say another word to me, not right away. He simply turned back toward the couple, eyes narrowed, lips pressed so tightly they turned pale. But others noticed. Not the bridesmaids, still posing by the photo booth. Not the aunts comparing ankle straps. No, the first to move was the man 2 tables over. Gray suit, thin-rimmed glasses, and the kind of face that remembered numbers better than names. He excused himself from a conversation mid-sentence, walked a half-moon across the floor, and stopped at the edge of my table. "You're Alina Graves," he said, not a question, a quiet acknowledgement. "Of Graves Equity Circle." I nodded. "We've been reviewing your East Shoreline proposal. Most efficient land use metrics I've seen this quarter." He glanced at the empty chair beside me. "Is this seat taken?" A minute later, someone else stopped by, this time a woman. Elegant, real estate developer. One of the names I'd seen floating on zoning dockets across the state but had never met in person. She didn't ask my name. She simply smiled, looked at the man beside me and said, "Did she also lead the Green Corridor project in Queens?" He answered for me, "She is the Green Corridor." The shift wasn't loud. It was subtle. It moved like water, flowing, redirecting, filling empty spaces without permission. The air around my table changed, warmed. Where there had been silence, now there were handshakes. Where there had been stillness, now there was intent. I stayed seated. I didn't gesture. I didn't pitch. They came anyway, not because I had a name card, not because I had a title on a projector screen, but because in rooms like this, when power reveals itself unexpectedly, it pulls gravity with it. And suddenly, the table no one wanted to sit at became the one people leaned toward. I saw Gerald watching. Across the room, he stood like a man watching a house he thought he owned being relisted under someone else's name. He didn't sip his drink, didn't blink much, just stood there, like someone trying to figure out which part of the floor plan he'd missed. Marielle came next. I felt her before I saw her. Her perfume, the slow tap of her heels, the way the laughter at nearby tables dimmed just slightly as she approached. "Renaa," she said. It took me a second to remember that name. A childhood nickname only she used, something soft and small from long ago. "I didn't know," she said, eyes scanning the new faces gathering near me. "About your firm, or this." I looked at her calmly. "I know." She swallowed. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I let the silence stretch. Then I said it, gently, not cruelly, "Because you never asked." She didn't have a response, not really. And to her credit, she didn't try to manufacture one. She nodded, slowly, then stepped back, half retreat, half realization. I think, for the first time in years, she saw me as something more than a role to assign or a shadow to step around. She saw me, not fully, not perfectly, but enough. And sometimes that's all a shift needs to begin. Some offers aren't bridges, they're lifeboats, and not every lifeboat is worth stepping into. He waited until the crowd thinned, not too close to the speeches, not during cake, but in the soft, ambiguous lull where no one's looking too closely, and some things can be said without microphones. Gerald Prescott approached like a man used to being approached, measured steps, one hand in his pocket, the other still holding a drink that had long since gone warm. "Alina," he said, like he was trying the word out for the first time. "May I?" I didn't move, didn't invite him to sit, just folded my hands gently on the table. He cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." I looked at him evenly. "You made an assumption." He nodded. "I made several." Silence, not the kind that demanded filling, the kind that left room for gravity. "I have a board opening," he offered after a pause. "One of our newer sustainability branches, expanding quickly. We're looking for vision." He said it carefully. No hint of condescension, but behind his eyes, I saw the familiar pattern. This wasn't an invitation. It was a correction, a recalculation. The moment someone powerful realizes they underestimated the wrong person and attempts to fold you back into their framework neatly, usefully, controllably. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I tilted my head slightly. Is that the same board that greenlit the Logan River demolition project? His jaw shifted. That was before my time. But not before your approval. He didn't deny it. I took a sip of water, set the glass down. I'm not interested. A flicker crossed his face, not offense but confusion. We decompensate generously. Equity options, autonomy, you'd have a full platform. I didn't raise my voice, didn't make a speech. Just, your firm's ethics policies don't meet our baseline standards. It was surgical, unemotional. True, and it landed exactly where I meant it to. He exhaled, sharp but silent, nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. For the first time that evening, he looked like someone standing on ground he no longer controlled. Then he turned and walked away. I didn't watch him go. I didn't need to. The refusal wasn't about winning. It wasn't revenge. It was just clarity. The kind that comes not from shouting, but from knowing exactly who you are and what you will not trade that for. Legacy doesn't need applause. It just needs to remain standing long after the music fades. I stayed just long enough to be polite. Through the cake cutting, through the awkward first dance, through a DJ transition so abrupt it made half the crowd blink between Claire de Lune and 80s synth pop. And then I stood, collected my clutch, tucked in the extra linen napkin folded beside my untouched bread roll. No one announced my exit. No spotlight followed me out, but I had already left what mattered. Earlier that evening, I'd handed a small linen-wrapped folder to the wedding coordinator. She didn't ask questions. I didn't offer explanations. Inside that folder were the transfer documents for a 3% silent equity partnership in a housing project breaking ground just outside the city. A project built on solar grids, clean zoning, and dignity. The paperwork was in both Marielle and Daniel's names. There was no note, no wax seal, no monogram, just signatures, just substance. It would take a few years to mature. But when it did, it would yield something neither flashy nor fragile, but steady, like good stone. The kind of asset no one could take credit for unless they knew where to look. I didn't give the gift to be remembered. I gave it because Daniel saw people. Because Marielle, even in all her brightness, might one day look around and feel the quiet solidity of what had been left behind. Because I still believe that presence doesn't have to be loud to change the ground we walk on. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt no triumph. Just breath. Just release. Not because Gerald had seen the ring. Not because the real estate table now knew my name. Not because Marielle finally blinked and saw more than the shadow beside her spotlight. But because I hadn't made myself small. Not once. Not this time. The valet jogged over same boy from earlier, same slightly crooked tie. He opened the door with a smile. Have a good night, ma'am. Not miss, not are you staff. Just ma'am, a word that said nothing yet held respect. I nodded. As I pulled onto the road, the headlights cut a ribbon through the Vineyard Hills. No one would notice my absence right away, but over time, I think they'll feel it. In the way legacy often lingers, not in centerpieces, not in photo albums, but in the foundations people walk on, never realizing whose hands laid them. I used to think vindication would feel like a spotlight, that it would come with gasps, confessions, applause. But real vindication, it's quieter. It feels like stillness, like truth settling into place. Let them toast each other under fairy lights. Let the dance floor swell. I had nothing more to prove, because I already knew I don't need a seat at their table. I build my own. And if they ever choose to sit at mine, they'll do so with both eyes open.